Should Australia become a republic? Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I want to talk about Australia becoming a republic, whether we should, the implications for that, how it would go about, and some of the arguments for and against. For those that are unfamiliar with Australia's kind of constitutional arrangements, Australia is a constitutional monarchy. We still have the British Monarch, at the time of recording, Queen Elizabeth II, as our head of state. She has a representative in Australia, the Governor-General, although in practice the Governor-General is appointed effectively by the Australian Parliament. And as such, we have the monarch on our coinage. Various royals will come and visit Australia occasionally. We're obviously a member of the Commonwealth. We play cricket. We do all those sorts of things that a British Commonwealth country would do. 20-odd years ago, 1999 actually, there was a referendum on whether Australia should become a republic. Now, the yes vote was split because of the nature of the question. It was quite a clever political tactic of the monarchist Prime Minister of the day, John Howard. And interestingly, the person that was heading up the Yes campaign for becoming a republic was Malcolm Turnbull, another later Prime Minister as well. He failed in this endeavour, as he did many other things in his political life. But that was the last time Australia really seriously considered the question whether or not we would remove the British monarch as our head of state and instead have our own Australian-born citizen as the head of state of the country. Now, there's a few things to consider with this, whether we are a republic or not, and the type of republic we would have. It is pretty clear that there is no appetite politically for Australia to move to a republic while the existing monarch is alive. There's a great depth of respect, admiration, and continuity for Queen Elizabeth II, who has carried out her duties as the head of state of Australia, but of course mostly of the UK, for many, many decades. And so much social change has happened during her reign that it would just be, I think, unthinkable for most people to, even a lot of people that want a republic, to do her the disrespect of losing Australia while she was still alive. I think that most people just don't have that appetite. But knowing that she's been in office for many, many decades, is the longest reigning monarch ever, we know that her time as Queen will come to an end at some point, and then presumably the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, will be crowned king, and the question of whether Australia should be a republic will be revisited, no doubt. Okay, whether that means that we'll have another referendum or what is unknown at this stage, but certainly Australia will have that national conversation. So first of all, why we should become a republic. I'm on the fence, but I'll give you the fors and against. Why we should become a republic is that Australia is this European culture situated on the edge of Asia. There's a famous phrase from former Prime Minister Paul Keating. It said, Australia needs to find its security in Asia, not from Asia. That is, we are an Asian country. Just geographically, that's the reality. We have a country of 280 million people as our nearest neighbour, the largest Muslim majority country in the world, Indonesia. There's all of Southeast Asia, ASEAN, of course, China, Korea, Japan. Like my home city is on the same time zone as Singapore, Beijing, Tokyo. So we're an Asian country. And if you look at our cuisine, all Australians, this is not something that people understand in media abroad, but all Australians can eat perfectly with chopsticks, right? We all have like a strong diet of rice and various other Asian foodstuffs, as well as European foods as well. Australians are increasingly Asian-centric in that sense. Most of our travel is to Asia. We are much more aware of Asia. And thus, by having the Union Jack in our flag, by having the Queen as our head of state, it makes us look a little bit juvenile when it comes to the other Asian countries. So we should be standing on our own 2 feet, having our own foreign policy that is clearly and visibly independent and unique and capable of taking advantage of all the things that Asia and the prosperity of the 21st century has to offer, while not in any way downgrading or abandoning our traditional relationships, particularly that with the United States. The United States itself, of course, being a republic. So that's the argument for it, that we were an adolescent country, no longer the spitting image of our parent country, Britain, and thus, as we evolve as a society that incorporates elements of both Europe and Asia, we have become our own thing and thus shouldn't have a foreign citizen as Australia's head of state. The argument against being a republic is that being part of the Commonwealth gives us ties to our traditional Western European friends that we wouldn't otherwise have, particularly obviously Britain, that being a member of the Commonwealth gives us additional forums. There's the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting and comprises like 50 heads of state. That's a major multilateral forum. Of course, Australia is a major player in that. There's a lot of Pacific Island states that are still part of the Commonwealth, and that's an important forum for Australia to engage with those smaller Pacific Island nations that we would otherwise have to do independently, and that would create a whole new series of bureaucracy. Then there's the question of how the head of state of Australia would be nominated and what kind of powers would be conferred on them and how they would truly be able to sit above politics. Because one of the problems we have, the Governor-General is a very ceremonial role. They have invested in them powers of Her Majesty, and once in our history it was exercised in a dramatic way. That was John Kerr in the 1970s firing the Prime Minister of Australia, and I don't think that would ever happen again. That kind of ceremonial function is not really going to unite the country in the way that most heads of state are supposed to do. So, for example, the Queen gives her message every year. The entirety of the UK listens to that message. She gives speeches at important junctures and inflection points throughout UK history. Apologise if you hear this alarm in the background. There is a hope that if you had an Australian head of state, they would be able to do the same. But the fact is they're going to be nominated by politicians. They'll be nominated largely for partisan reasons. And thus, yes, they'll be doing the ceremonial duties of swearing in ministers and conferring citizenship awards and things like that and honours lists. But they're not really going to be able to stand up in front of the whole country and give that message in the way that the Queen certainly can. So that's a big question mark as to we become a republic, but who's going to be the head of state and how will they be determined? I don't think we'll ever have like a president as we would have in the United States. So in the US, they deliberately separated the executive from the legislative and created a separation of powers in that sense. Australia, I don't think will ever do that. We won't have the Prime Minister of Australia becoming the head of state separate to the Parliament. That combination of executive and legislative will remain, which only means that the head of state will have a purely ceremonial role. If they have a purely ceremonial role, why go through the effort in the first place? We might as well just keep the British monarch. And then there is the sense that we shouldn't be jettisoning our history in the sense of cutting ties with the UK, that we should be evolving in our history. We can keep the Queen or the British monarch as Australia's head of state, but evolve our other democratic institutions to be more adaptive as an independent country and more adaptive to Asia, i.e. just a sense of British-style convention. That is that you have a series of evolutionary conventions that allow us to achieve the same outcome, potentially, as what a republic would. And things like, perhaps changing our coinage and changing our, the Queen becoming less and less of a figure in our world, still there is kind of an emotional connection since it's purely ceremonial. Potentially that's the way to go. I think ultimately Australia one day is likely to become a republic because on a long enough time scale, put it this way, there'll be a referendum that passes eventually. And once it's passed, we would never go back. Like if we became a republic, it's not like we're going to vote again 30 years later and say, no, actually we missed the British monarchy and we want them back. I think if we made that change, people would just accept that we're now a republic now and that's fine. There's a lot of resistance to, for example, changing the Australian flag. And this becomes, there's another side to this republic debate, which isn't so much about our constitutional arrangements, but is more about the culture wars. People who say Australia Day is Invasion Day, it was, like a travesty for the Australian Aboriginal community, that the Union Jack represents colonial oppression, and therefore, we should jettison and change the flag for those reasons, and therefore we should become a republic because, we need to be inclusive towards people. If we could separate the need to be inclusive, which I think we absolutely do need to be, and recognize, for example, the tens of thousands of years long history of our first Australians without turning it into a cultural war issue, right? And I think that is going to hamper the republic debate and probably cripple it for decades going forward, because what will be seen as, it won't be whether or not we're a mature country that can strike out on our own and should take responsibility for ourselves. Of course, we are an independent country for all, political, foreign policy and legal reasons. But this symbolic change, that's not what I think the debate's going to be about. The debate's going to be about, my parents, my father was killed and buried under the Australian flag. We should never change it. Queen Elizabeth is the custodian of our British Celtic legacy. We should never get rid of the British monarchy. That kind of view will be buttressing against the whole black armband of history, oppressed Indigenous peoples, destruction of Indigenous ways of life, anti-colonialism mentality. So that's where I think, unfortunately, the debate will take us, rather than what I think is the more mature adult debate to have, which is, we're a whole united nation, and therefore we should consider whether or not the British monarchy is or is not something that should be part of our continuity of a national story. That's a different question in my mind, but I don't think it'll go that way. It'll be hijacked by these culture war subject areas. And to that end, and I'll wrap up with this, Australia has changed its national anthem slightly. And when I say Australia, it wasn't Australia that changed it. It was the Prime Minister unilaterally. So when I woke up on the 1st of January this year, he tweeted out, "For we are one and free." And I thought that was a typo. I'm like, how can the Prime Minister not know Australia's national anthem? But it turns out that was a change that was made, because previously there was a line that said, "For we are young and free." That has changed to "For we are one and free." And the deliberate change was about being more inclusive towards the first Australians, because of course it's a very old culture. I think it's fair to criticize that change for a few reasons. One, it's purely symbolic and no one ever asked for it. And it has a whiff of pandering to it. So I don't like that for that reason. Secondly, Australia didn't exist before 1901. Like, you're kind of saying the first Australians. Well, there was a whole bunch of rich different cultures and societies and languages and tribes across the continent that we now call Australia. But Australia certainly didn't exist when in a pre-colonial era. So to say that we are all young as Australians is probably not factually wrong. But the third thing that disturbs me about this is, even if I agreed with the change, and I'm not sure, like, I don't care, it's one word and doesn't change really the national anthem, which no one likes anyway. No one actually wants the Australian national anthem. Everyone's embarrassed to sing it. It's actually quite a bad song. But whether or not a Prime Minister can unilaterally change something of cultural significance, right? So where does that power start and end is another question. And the good news about the Republic, and I'll talk about that in another video, it's not relevant for this. The good thing about the Republic is that such a profound change can only happen through a referendum, where a majority of people in a majority of states have to vote for that change. And given I know that if we ever voted to become a republic, we would never reverse that decision, that is rightly a significant question for all of Australia going forward. I'll leave it there. Please, if you have a view on whether Australia should be a republic or not, leave a comment down below. As I said, I'm absolutely on the fence. I'm actually kind of happy either way, and I say that truly. And if you found value in this discussion and provoked some thoughts, please like and subscribe. Consider sharing the video as well, and I'll happily see you in the next episode. Thank you.